Welcome back to Product Coffee. I'm Jason Brett. We've been running this weekly product management meetup since about August of last year, and I'm glad you could join us this morning. Today, we're going to be joined by Mark Isbitts of Claris Health, who's going to talk about building a product advisory council, and we're going to have a team exercise to think through some of the implications of that. One of the things I'd like to do as we're getting started is I'd like to share a little bit of information. We got a little bit of housekeeping that I'd like to share with you before we kick off the actual session. And I want to share with you a little bit about our sponsors. So we couldn't do Product Coffee without the support of some great businesses that really want to support the product management community. And the first is actually also a company that I represent is Skookum, a global logic company. We are an end-to-end software development company. We do customer experience and digital transformation strategy, and we take that all the way from the product strategy side of things through execution and delivery of software. So if you're not a company that has completed your digital transformation and you're looking for a partner to help you through that conversation and through that transformation, the strategy and developing the tools that you need to enable your entire workforce and organization, Skookum is an organization that might be able to help you. We're part of Global Logic, which is a larger software development company, which was recently announced for being acquired by Hitachi, which is a really interesting turn of events as well. We're also sponsored by the Pragmatic Institute, which is one of the leading, if not the leading, trainer and certification company for product management professionals. Pragmatic Institute has been supporting Product Coffee and Product Camp Atlanta since the very beginning. Our very first product camp, they were one of the very first ones to step up and say, absolutely, we will support this event, and have been sponsoring ever since. Their goal is to strengthen the product management community through great education. And we've got a lot of people here in Product Coffee who have taken courses by Pragmatic Institute. So if you'd like to know how their courses are conducted or the quality of the material that they share, you can literally reach out to most of the people here at Product Coffee, and they'll be happy to share their experience with you. I'm included in that group as well. And finally, Feature Upvote is a tool for product managers to collect feedback directly from your customers. You can go to featureupvote.com and check it out. But this allows you to take recommendations and feature suggestions and enhancement suggestions from your customers. Your customers can vote on it. It's a very inexpensive tool as well. We use Feature Upvote at Product Coffee over at productcoffee.com/ideas to take your suggestions for future sessions that you can that we might conduct here at Product Coffee. So go over to productcoffee.com/ideas. Try out the software, look at the ideas and suggestions that are there, vote for your favorites, and make a suggestion or two of your own. And we'll get folks to look at those and see the ones that rise up in interest for the audience. And we'll turn those into sessions like we've done here with Mark's session today. Our speaker today is, once again, Mark Isbitts from Claris Health. And Mark submitted his idea on the ideas forum at productcoffee.com/ideas a few months back, and got some interest there. And so we wanted to invite Mark to come speak at Product Coffee and share his thoughts and experiences on building a product advisory council and some of the philosophical differences that he's got, and as well as some of the differences between a product advisory council and some of the other types of customer and user and market groups you might create in your product organization as well. So Mark, welcome. Thanks for joining us, and you can take it away.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jason. Let me share my screen, and I'm going to open up my chat too, just in case. But feel free to jump in and ask questions as we go along. It's not a very lengthy presentation, so I've kind of built in time there for discussion before we break out into groups. So the first thing I want to mention is that I've been a part of both existing user groups, advisory groups, whatever else they call them, and then I was chartered with actually building some on my own. So a couple of things before we get started. Number one, there's really no right or wrong. So what I'm going to give you is my perspective, what's worked for me in the past. But obviously every organization's different, every client base is different. So you'll have to kind of hopefully maybe take away at least parts of these, but in the end, you'll have to determine what's going to work best for you, your clients, and your organization. So, by the way, my phone number is down here too. So if you ever need to chat about specific issues, you're more than welcome to give me a call there. So the first thing, which I think is most important as it came up this morning, is what exactly is a product advisory board or product advisory group, and how does that differ from a user group? And they are very different. Then we're going to talk about how do you choose your members, which it might be a little bit more complex than some people realize. How do you administer and manage not only the group, but in an individual meeting to make sure that you're getting the most value and then your customer base is getting the best value? And then how do you actually perform that? So the first thing is, what is a product advisory group? How does it differ from a user group? There are lots of different reasons. The main ones I think I tried to highlight here. An advisory board is very market focused versus very product focused in a user group. So one of the biggest differences is that a product advisory board should really be at the manager level and above. So not to say that you shouldn't have the individual users, but you really want somebody who's kind of got an eye on the global organization, and in a best case scenario is really keeping their eye on their market. So in my case, it would be the health insurance industry. So what I would want is somebody who, and what I do is fraud, waste, and abuse technology. So in a healthcare payer organization, it's called the Special Investigations Unit, or SIU. So what I'm looking for is somebody who manages a team of investigators and who probably uses the product, but not necessarily the everyday user. Might be, might not be, but really somebody who's kind of goes beyond that bits and bytes of the product. So they understand the product, but at the same time, they're really looking at the market. And then also what you're looking for is that product advisory board should be representative of the voice of the customer as a customer base as a whole, as well as that individual customer, but more importantly, the voice of the market. And you'll probably hear Steve Johnson talk a lot about that. And he's a big proponent of, we are market experts, we're not product experts. So really looking for a representative of not just what they do, meaning the individual person does, what their group does, what the organization does, how they think, how they feel, and then how that reflects out on the market. Whereas a user group is going to be very specific to how they're using your product and what they're looking for in the product, as opposed to problems in the marketplace or within their organization that you may be able to solve. And that goes to that last point there, which is focusing on market problems, which the advisory board should do. You could certainly use your product as a representative of how you're solving market problems, but really what you're looking to do is keep an eye on the both near future and distant future of what are those market problems that are still out there that we might be able to solve, and using your product advisory board members as that megaphone and the conduit between you and the marketplace. Whereas the user group, you're really focusing more on the feature functions of your product and what can you do to that individual product to make it better, make it different. If you've been part of user groups too, they have a tendency to sometimes evolve into bitch sessions about what's wrong with your product. So certainly in the user group, you kind of want to curb that, but that's inevitably going to happen in the user group. Whereas the product advisory board, hopefully you're kind of raising the discussion up a bit so that you don't get into that trap. So the values and benefits to both the customers and to you and the organization. As I mentioned, the advisory board should be really the voice of the market, not just that customer. So it's kind of the individual represents the group represents the individual, and you're trying to really look for consensus within the customer advisory board. In addition, you're exposing your product and the company to a higher level decision maker. I could tell you at my current company, we typically are selling to the mid-tier and below, so that user level and maybe their manager. We're at the point now in the evolution of our company where we really need to get to a much higher level. We need to be at that C level, that high VP level within some of the larger organizations such as the Blue Cross Blue Shield plans. And something like an advisory board really helps you get in there, because you could bring those people in as sort of a perk and get, instead of the manager of the special investigations unit, maybe I'm getting the vice president of payment integrity, which is over all of payment integrity, not just fraud, to be that representative. And they may not know who Claris Health is, or they may have heard of Claris Health and know that we're a partner of them, but don't really understand what we do. So it's a great opportunity to bring in people within your customer who might not be quite as aware as the individual user. And we all know, if you've been in product management long enough, quite often even the biggest fans of your product aren't necessarily the best cheerleaders, because they're just really, they enjoy the product, it's useful for them, but they're not necessarily voicing that throughout the organization. The next one, I think, is, at least for me, it's been incredibly valuable, and the feedback I've gotten from my customers is this is perhaps the most important thing for them, which is it's giving them that forum to share different things, sharing ideas, sharing innovations. So it's not just us bringing the innovation, it's them saying, yeah, we're doing this, or wouldn't it be great if we all could do this? And most importantly, the shared experiences. Again, I'll use my personal experience with special investigations units. The nature of what they do, which is investigating fraud, waste, and abuse, both with their members, with the providers, and even sometimes internally, they kind of get pushed aside and put into the closet, and kind of the dirty little secret that the health plans don't really like to talk about. There's one organization, the National Healthcare Anti-Fraud Association, and that's basically it. That is the only opportunity they have to share ideas, and that happens once a year, that conference. So they don't have a lot of opportunities to kind of share the war stories. And yeah, it might turn into a bitch session, but at least it's a bitch session about how can we be doing things better, which for me as a product owner is going to be incredibly valuable to hear that. So just that interaction and really introducing people to their peers can be incredibly valuable, especially if it's a fairly niched type of market that you're in. And finally, input and insight into a lot of different areas, certainly your product improvements. So even though I mentioned that one is where the advisory board is more market focused, the user group is more product focused, you still want to bring some of the product into the advisory board as well. So with product improvements and new product ideas, you don't necessarily want to get into the bits and bytes. I think you might be able to use part of a meeting to talk about that. But again, you're really looking at what are the challenges you're still having in the organization, and then figuring out how do I bring that back in. And sometimes what you could do is use multiple meetings to talk about that. So you use the first meeting to say, okay, tell me in a perfect world where time, money, and staffing wasn't an issue, what could you be doing better? Then in the next meeting, you come back with maybe a couple of ideas and say, how would this work within your organization, without making any promises? These are still just kind of whiteboarding. And then the third meeting is you come back with a little more concrete ideas and have them react to it. So it certainly can be that forum for the innovation and new product ideas, and also I would say enhancements to existing products. The next one can get a little squirrely, but if it's done right, you can often get really good information about your competition. I'm sure if you've been in product management, what's the biggest question sales is always asking you is, how does the competition price their products? In my world, that is incredibly difficult to get. not just the pricing, but going beyond the competition's marketing and really understanding what does it look like? So what is the UI compared to yours when people say it's easy to use? One example is my biggest competitor is a pretty small company, but they've been very successful. Everyone says, yeah, the product's easy to use. And I finally did see the product, and it's easy to use because it's incredibly basic and there's not a lot of functionality there to it. So trying to be able to dig a little deeper into the competition, and sometimes they would be more than willing to share that, especially because more than likely, if you're at that kind of manager, VP, director level and above for the advisory board, they're going to have your competitors calling on them constantly, trying to steal that business away. So see if they're willing to share some of that information, whether it's pricing, which my experience is they're incredibly hard to get them to share that, but maybe they could talk about how do they see the competition versus your organization. When I do my regular market research calls, what I do is kind of like an old psychology thing where I say, I'm going to read to you a bunch of companies. Tell me the first word or words that come to mind. And I go down the list of the competitors. And the last one I say is Claris Health and see what they say. And then that also helps you get an idea of not only what the competitor is doing, but how they're viewed in the marketplace. And we all know that quite often how you view the competitor is not necessarily how the market views the competitor. And then the last point here is the selling and decision-making processes. I will tell you, for those of us who have to work in the health payer marketplace, I don't care if you're selling pencils and paper clips, it's going to take you a minimum of 8 to 12 months to sell anything into a payer. Most of these are large bureaucratic organizations whose job is literally to avoid risk. And that carries through everything they do. So what we try to do, and what I've done with my advisory boards, is get a better understanding of how does the sales process work in the organization. So for example, if I'm coming in and I'm selling something that's $500,000, who has the approval to sign off on $500,000? If we're a new vendor, new company in a new market, or if we're introducing a new product that does X, who are the people that would have to make that decision, and what would you need to know in order to make that decision? How would you evaluate us versus the competition? So it's somewhat theoretical, but it really gives you a great insight to help the salespeople to shorten that sales cycle, but more importantly, make sure that you're talking to the right people at the right times. Part of that too is what I've done is, what's the process? I have a personal bugaboo about going in and doing a demo immediately before you even understand what the customer wants. My friend Jerry Seifert, who's on these calls quite often, introduced me to somebody, a friend of his, who helps sales organizations. And he said, you know, once you show the demo, they have no reason to talk to you. That's a great example of how the selling and decision-making process, getting more detail about that can help. So you're showing a demo right away and the customer says no. And I've had this happen to me where I had a client that was a very close personal friend of mine, and she let me come in when we were completely changing our marketing message. And we did sort of a mock sales presentation. And what they said to us was, for the first meeting, don't come in with any slides or any demos, just sit and have a conversation and understand our business, which in a way is so simple, but in a way it was incredibly eye-opening, right? Because what's the first thing the salespeople ask for? Slide deck and a demo. So go in and have a conversation. That's something we learned from the advisory council. So how do you choose your members? This is probably one of the biggest faults I see in organizations, is they just take their biggest and or best customers, best meaning the ones who love them the most, or their biggest customers, and put them on the advisory board. Personally, I don't think that's a good idea, because then you kind of get a very skewed opinion of the company and of the customers, and you get somewhat of an echo chamber there. So the first thing to do is determine how big an advisory board do you want? So if you have 100 customers, what's a good representative sample size? I don't think there's any cut and dry. It's more of just a feel. But you want enough where you'll get a good cross section and a good voice of the market, but you also don't want too many where it becomes unmanageable in a meeting. And you have people sitting there either talking too much or not talking enough, which we'll get to in just a second. So I mentioned here, avoid choosing just the good or the best. To me, a good cross section of customers is really the best thing to do. And those customers can be, maybe those who you don't talk to a lot. I would recommend getting also a good cross section if you're in variable markets. So you want a couple of the big ones, a couple of the mid-sized ones, a couple of the small ones. Some love you, some that maybe you've had issues with, not only because they'll feel a little bit more attached to the company, but you want to hear those opinions as well. And then most importantly, some that you never hear from. So you have no idea what their opinion is of the company. So again, good cross-section really helps there. The other thing is making sure that these are people who are tied in to the rest of the organization, because quite often you're going to have to learn information that goes beyond that area of the company. So for me, I need to know the fraud, waste, and abuse program extends out to a lot of different parts of the payer. It could go into medical management, provider relations, claims operations. So I need people who are able to reach out to those other parts of the organization and bring that information back in. So they're not just giving their opinion, they're actually talking to people in the organization that are in the know. And then finally, I say significant related experience. What I mean there is you don't want somebody who's brand new to the position. In other words, they've done that job or similar jobs. They've either been on that path. So if they're an operations person, they've been in operations for a while, whether with your client or someone else. I know we've seen a good example might be marketing, right? If you're selling products into a marketing organization, you don't want someone who was in IT and then all of a sudden becomes the chief marketing officer, which I've actually seen before, because they're not going to have kind of that deeper level perspective. They're only going to know their organization, and also they're not going to be able to really add a lot to the conversation because they just don't have that breadth of experience. So once you kind of determine who needs to be part of this advisory board, a couple of quick tips, I think, which would be helpful. The first thing is you always want to send a personalized welcome letter. One thing I did not mention, by the way, is sometimes you may get into let's call it a heated discussion about who should own the customer advisory board. And there's a lot of debate to that, and we could certainly talk about that. Obviously, I'm biased, so I think the product organization absolutely needs to own that, and then bringing in other people. But whoever the owner is, whether that's you or someone else in the organization, should send that personalized letter. Even if it's an email, I would do it as an attachment, so it's a little more formalized. And you absolutely need a non-disclosure agreement because number one, you're going to be talking about things that you don't want other people to know, but more importantly, it gives your customer the sense of kind of freedom to discuss things without leaving the room. Kind of what happens in the customer advisory board stays in the customer advisory board, at least at the individual level. Next thing is creating a board charter. So what do we mean by charter? It's what exactly does the customer advisory board mean? What does it stand for? What's the goal? Next one is really important is you don't want a massive turnover of your board members. So you kind of want to stagger it so that you have some experienced board members with some new board members. So a good thing to do there is, let's say you have 10 people coming on as the board. You want to maybe do 3, 3, and 4, or some semblance of that, where the first 3 people stay on for 2 years, second 3 people maybe stay on for 18 months, and then the last 4 people stay on for however long, and then you're continually rotating them. Next one, pretty tactical but important. Get bios and put them together and send them out, so that don't assume that your customers know each other. So make sure that they're introduced kind of before you kick something off, so that they get an understanding of who's who and also what their backgrounds are. And then certainly, most importantly, is make sure that they feel an ownership in this. So it's not just you asking questions. Ask them for topics and things that you want to talk about. Doesn't mean you have to use every one of them, but at least make sure that they understand that they're the ones who should be guiding the agenda, more or less. So ask them for those comments, and then don't be afraid to follow up with the individuals who submit those comments and get more detail before the meetings. So now you've gotten the advisory board together, you're going to kick off, you're going to start setting your meetings up. What do? For me, quarterly meetings work best. For small organization, you maybe want to do it a couple of times a year. I wouldn't recommend really doing it more than quarterly per year, because it's a lot of time you're asking of the customer, and frankly, it's a lot more work for you to do. What's worked best for me in the past, and of course in the non-COVID days, is split those up between 1.5 hour conference calls and do those every other month, and then every other month do an on-site. Let me talk to the conference calls first. I would recommend doing 1.5 hours, because there's usually a lot of discussion, and you usually need more time than you think you do. So schedule it for 1.5 hours. If it goes an hour, fine, but I would recommend at least 1.5 hours to get everything in and make sure that everyone's opinions are heard. The on-sites are great perks for the customer, understanding that everyone has a budget. What I've tried to do in the past is work one of those on-sites around any type of conferences that they all go to. So in my case, it's the National Healthcare Anti-Fraud Association conference, where pretty much everybody goes to. So what I've done is the day before the conference starts, we pay for their added night in the hotel. We bring them in, we get a conference room, usually at the conference hotel. And it doesn't cost a ton of money. It's going to cost you some, but you do a day or a day and a half on site. That way they're already going there. They don't have to make special arrangements. They already have the time off, and it's just an extra day. Sometimes, depending on how new the organization is, how new the product line is, you can even do it half a day, because most of the conferences don't start until the afternoon of the first day. So you bring them in the night before, you do a half day in the morning, and then they go right to the conference. The other on-site, it's always nice to bring them into your office if you have an office. That way they get to meet other people in the organization, and mix it in with different social things, whether it's a dinner and a happy hour. When I was at McKesson, we used to do half a day of a meeting. We take them out somewhere in Philadelphia. Things like we did a food tour of South Philly. We went to one of the DuPont mansions, things like that, ball games. And then the second day we do kind of a half to 3/4 day meeting, and then they're out the next day, that afternoon of the second day. Now the topics and the agendas, I would definitely divide this up by product or department related issues and market related issues. So you could still get into some of the product issues, but you don't want to get into kind of those bits and bytes of the product. You're really talking more about how do we move the product forward. Or if you're having a product that's very stagnant, for example, why is it stagnant? One issue I've done in the past where I actually helped another product owner because they said that of all the functionality in the product, they knew that the customers were using maybe 30% of the functionality. So why weren't they using the other 70% of the functionality? So divide it up between that and then the market related. So if there's any type of regulatory issues that are going on, or political issues, or economic issues that are going on that might affect the market as a whole, always good to hear. Or pick a topic that's going to relate to all of them and get their different opinions, So you could kind of triangulate the opinion so you're not just hearing from one customer. And then the pre-work. Part of being a member of an advisory board is they're going to have to do a little bit of work. So not a lot, but what I would suggest is give them a little homework to do. Send them some of the questions in advance, and then ask them to go and talk to other parts of the organization, talk to their subordinates, and get their opinion. So you're also not just hearing one opinion, you're hearing the organization's opinion. Then conducting a meeting. So now that you're actually in it, preparing withdrawal. So what I mean by that is you don't have to conduct the whole meeting. Let other people do it, whether if you're a manager and you have product people working under you, let them lead one of the discussion topics. Bring in marketing. I would not recommend bringing in sales, only because in the past, my experience has been salespeople can't help but sell, and this is supposed to be a safe environment for the customer. So they should not be getting sold to. Bring them in for maybe lunch, where they could talk to their customers, et cetera, but stick to, marketing, development, in my case, analytics or artificial intelligence, the data science people, implementation people, if there are issues around implementation. So bring in other parts of the organization to both mix up the discussion, but also let them meet the other people in the organization. Next is really important. Don't let one person dominate. Some of this is just, if you're not comfortable with it, getting skills in sort of how to mediate a meeting. But there's usually going to be an alpha dog. Don't let them be the only one talking. So a very easy way is take the old law school approach, where if Jason's talking too much, I could say, Jason's talking, and I'll find a time where he's pausing. I'll say, okay, Peter, what do you think of that? And don't be afraid to call on all the different people. Another way for that is to break them out into groups. And have sort of little group discussions and then bring them back in, kind of like what we do here at Product Coffee. Break them out into groups, come back in. Next one is also really important. Do not get defensive about any criticism. That is part of having these discussions. So take the criticism, bring it back to the organization. Do not get defensive during the meeting. And then the last one is also perhaps the most important, which is people that and your customers that are giving you suggestions, they don't necessarily are going to expect that you're going to act on every suggestion or every idea or every complaint, but you at least have to acknowledge that and let them know that there's some action taken. And maybe that action is, you know what, our product or our technology is not feasible for that right now. Or that's a great idea, but we have some other pending issues that are we feel are more important. We'll put it on the roadmap and get back to you. So make sure at the following meeting, whenever there's a list of action items, to-dos, that you are following up on that. Even if the follow-up is we're not taking any action at this time, but make sure you acknowledge that you've heard them, that you're acting on it. Before we get to the breakout session, are there any general questions for me?
Somebody asked, can you share what the 60-second pitch is for you as to why a customer should work with you in this way?
Yes. You get to, as a customer, you as a leader in your organization, you will have the chance to voice your opinion about the direction of the products. You get to guide the roadmap. You get to your opinion to be heard into how our products, existing products and future products, should head. And the benefit of that is you'll also get to hear from other people doing the same job you are and getting best practices.
See here, I know you talked a little bit about qualification, how you qualify a customer to be on an advisory board, but that might be worth kind of reiterating since there was some questions about that. Let's make sure we capture that in the notes. Yeah, and I also know that somebody, well, let's touch on this for just a minute. Can't remember. I'm not sure who asked that question, but I wanted to make sure that we kind of capture this for you. What about when a member of your advisory board isn't working out and they're not a good fit? How do you gently remove them?
Yeah, so one thing I forgot to mention that helps is part of your charter needs to be kind of the ground rules. So for example, one ground rule could be if you miss 3 meetings in a row, we reserve the right to replace you. That being said, something I forgot to mention is it's part of the ground rule should be they could send a proxy. So if Jason's in my organization, I can't make the meeting, I can go send him. What that does sometimes is it gets you a replacement, which I've had before, where the main person says, I just don't have the time, can I send Jason? And that's fine too, as long as Jason is an active participant. It is a little bit of a sticky wicket though. Sometimes I would say, start calling on them when they're at the meetings, so that they feel not only the ownership, but let's face it, there's a certain sense of embarrassment if they don't have anything to say and you're calling on them. I found though in general, while some people may be more quiet than the others, if they're willing to be part of the advisory board, they're going to participate in some aspect. And someone asked, I think before about, why should they join it? I've actually had to turn down people because I had enough and everybody wanted to be on the advisory board, because keep in mind, these are the people who are not the everyday users of the product, and people love to talk about what they do, complain about what they do, feel like they're knowledgeable about what they do. So you have to kind of present it as almost a perk for them, not as a job or a mandate.
A question that came to mind for me. So you don't generally have the sales organization participate in the advisory board. I know that we have frequently, in my past, we've had sales want to guarantee customers a position on the advisory board. If they sign with us, hey, can we promise them they're going to be on the customer advisory board or the product advisory board? Do you recommend allowing for that, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, so I will qualify that with my background is primarily launching new products. Mm-hmm. So the way I would deal with that is, number one, if you either don't have an advisory board or you're still looking for members, evaluate, are they a good member, or at least their profile fits the profile, and sure, that's fine to do. The other thing is, if you have a full board, you could say, yeah, you could promise that, but we can't put them on until somebody rolls off, which is why you want to also stagger that, so you're not having to replace 10 people at a time.
And that gets to
so when the next one rolls off, they're the first one to roll in.
Gotcha. It's great. So there are definitely some more questions floating around on there, but I want to make sure we've got a few minutes for the breakout if we have enough time left. So let's talk about that.
Great. All right. So this was a little tricky for me to put together. So hopefully feel free to kind of take some liberties when you get into your breakout groups. So I tried to give an example here. So let's say your products are sold in a P&C, that's property and casualty insurance companies, helping them reduce their risks by incorporating analytics and artificial intelligence into predicting their customers' risk levels. So risk assessment of an organization, of an insurance organization. Company is the third leading provider, so they're kind of on the competition scale, they're number 3 along with Acme and Genenco, although that I tried to give a Godfather reference there, it's actually Genco. For those who've seen The Godfather. And they were first in the market. So you are the newest player and you're now third on the list in terms of competitors. So you want to pick 7 customers for your advisory board. Talk about why would you choose them, criteria you would use, and then some of the topics you want to cover. You don't have to be an expert in P&C insurance, so you could just give broad topics. So here's kind of a brief definition of who's in the customer base. Right now, there are 50 customers. 30 are very strong advocates. Within that 30, 15 are what you'd consider power users, 10 are occasional users, 5 are rare users, 15 are barely referenceable. We've all had that, right? They've had issues with implementation that they hold a grudge still, and kind of you lost a little bit of the trust because of the implementation. They've made several requests for what they consider are enhancements. You might consider them bugs, or they consider them bugs, you consider it an enhancement. There have been too many bugs for them, and that they also use one of the competitors' products alongside of yours. 5 do not have regular conversations with your company, so you don't really know much about how they're using the product or even what they think about a product, and they may or may not be using a competitor's product. So here's your customer base. Here are the questions to ask.
I'm going to break us off. We've got a pretty quick turnaround on this one. I got about 10 minutes for us to kind of jump in and talk about this a little bit. And I'm going to break you out into some rooms for about 10 minutes. So I want to welcome everybody back. I heard in one of the rooms that I kind of popped into, Ann Kimsey had a really great insight, and I want to get her to share that, and then we'll pitch it back to Mark to close out the session today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. So what I was telling them at my last company, I had the opportunity to do like a reset on the advisory board. So what I did is I reached out to every single member, did 30-minute hour conversations with them to say, you know, hey, how have you liked it? What have you liked about it? What don't you? What would you like to see? And, you know, typical stuff. But the one and actually surprising comment I got is a theme was give me skin in the game, meaning what they wanted is they wanted a reason to show up again. So they wanted to say, hey, in that meeting, give me an action item. Tell me I need to go off and do research. I need to do something. So that way in the next meeting, they had to present, they had to share their findings. They had to do something, and they had an action from that. So again, it was a surprising comment that I got from them because I thought that they would just want to show up and leave, but they actually wanted skin in the game.
Yeah, that was a really great insight. I know it went back to one of the the prep materials that you had there, Mark, was to give them some pre-work to do, and it kind of tied that together really nicely, I thought. So I'm going to hand it back to you, to Mark, to kind of wrap it up for the next few seconds. And thanks again.
Yeah, sorry I went a little long. I was hoping we'd have some more time as a group, but yeah, just to close out, I think, you know, again, there's no right or wrong. A couple of things, Andy brought this up in our breakout group that I think Ann just mentioned, is let the customers really, once you get it going, you get it going, but the customer should be the one kind of driving it so that they feel an ownership of it, and you're really there more as a facilitator and an organizer, and they're the ones who are kind of running the meeting. Give them topics to present, give them, let them kind of be the talkers. You need to be the listener. And again, you know, I don't have a very strong product management organization in my company today, so I love talking to people. I meet with Jerry every couple of weeks to go walking at Roswell Park, which are great. We have great conversations. Peter and I talk periodically, so feel free to reach out to me. And, you know, I would certainly love to learn the things that are going on, kind of like what Ann brought up. I think that's a great thing. So just keep the conversation going, and let me know if I could help in any way.
Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate you putting this together and sharing with us and teeing up the conversation. We'll continue it on the LinkedIn group over at productcoffee.com/group. That'll get you a link directly into the LinkedIn group. If you haven't already joined, it's a good way to stay in touch and carry this conversation on. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. I'll keep the conference open for a couple more minutes, just if anybody has any kind of parting thoughts and last conversations to wrap up this morning.